The humanistic approach to teaching student-centered instruction. The national conversation about schooling almost always emphasizes cognitive processes. People both inside and outside of education say that students need to master higher level thinking skills so they can acquire larger, more complex, and useful knowledge bases. You see that orientation reflected in such initiatives as No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top, and the Common Core curriculum. As educational psychologists have a strong cognitive orientation, we see nothing inherently wrong with this goal. It's a complex world that requires more advanced cognitive skills than was the case for previous generations. What does concern us, however, is that these conversations and programs occur within an overly narrow framework. The unstated assumption is that improving how students think and what they learn can be achieved just by altering learning standards, content standards, instructional methods, and curriculum materials. While the average person may see nothing wrong with this orientation, as educational psychologists, we know better. There are powerful non-cognitive variables that have to be taken into account. Students' needs, emotions, self-perceptions, and values play an important role in learning anything. The theoretical orientation that historically has addressed these types of variables is known as the humanistic approach. It assumes that students will be highly motivated to learn when the learning material is personally meaningful, when they understand the reasons for their own behavior, and when they believe that the classroom environment supports their efforts to learn, even if they struggle. Consequently, a humanistic approach to teaching strives to help students better understand themselves and to create a supportive classroom atmosphere that activates the inherent desire all human beings have to learn and fulfill their potential. The relevance of a humanistic approach to teaching may not be immediately apparent to everyone, but it is easy to support. We have known for some time that learning is as much influenced by how students feel about themselves as by the cognitive skills they possess. When students conclude that the demands of a task are beyond their current level of knowledge and skill, what we referred to in a previous chapter as a low sense of self-efficacy, they are likely to experience such debilitating emotions as anxiety and fear. Once these negative perceptions and emotions are created, the student has to divert time and energy from the task at hand to figuring out how to deal with the negative self-perceptions and emotions. And the solutions that students formulate are not always appropriate. Some may, for instance, decide to reduce their efforts and settle for whatever passing grade they can get. Others may give up entirely by cutting class, not completing homework assignments, and not studying for tests. A considerable amount of research from the health field has shown that people are more likely to use positive methods of coping with the stress of illness and disease when they perceive their environment to be socially supportive. So it should come as no surprise that educational researchers have found positive student-teacher relationships to be associated with higher levels of engagement and achievement. Pioneers of the humanistic approach. The humanistic approach to understanding human behavior blossomed during the 1960s, principally because of the writings of three individuals, Abraham Maslow, Carl Rogers, and Arthur Combs. Although the primary focus of their careers was counseling, they also wrote about the relevance of humanistic principles to education in such books as Toward a Psychology of Being, Freedom to Learn, and the Professional Education of Teachers. We can sum up the essence of their ideas about learning and education as follows. People have an inherent desire to make the most of their capabilities, a characteristic that Maslow called self-actualization. Think of it as an inherent desire to learn and become competent. Self-actualization cannot occur until the more basic physiological safety, belonging, and esteem needs have been satisfactorily met. And teachers can play a critical role in helping students meet these needs. The best way to understand a student's behavior is to understand how the student sees herself, which we referred to in earlier chapters as self-esteem and self-efficacy, and the situation she is in. Is she confident and comfortable, or self-doubting, anxious, and fearful? Learning is most meaningful when students understand how material and lessons relate to their own lives. Learning occurs best when the student is convinced that the teacher accepts the student for what he or she is and is there to help the student succeed. Another way to summarize the humanistic approach to education is to say that teachers should strive to establish a caring atmosphere in their classrooms, a concept about which we will have more to say shortly. Teaching from a humanistic orientation. Teachers who adopt a humanistic orientation seek to create a classroom environment in which students believe that the teacher's primary goal is to understand the student's cognitive and emotional needs, values, motives, and self-perceptions, and to help the student learn. This environment is characterized by some, if not all, of the following features. Classrooms are clean, well lit, properly maintained, and physically safe. Students are given emotional support, such as helping them cope with disappointment, anxiety, and fear of failure. Students are given clear expectations for behavior and academic work that are geared to individual differences and abilities. Lessons are organized and easy to understand. Help with difficult tasks is provided when needed. Teacher-student interactions are characterized by respect, courtesy, and fairness, by, for example, saying please and thank you. Feedback is constructive rather than harsh, so as to avoid humiliation, embarrassment, and fear. Opportunities to make certain choices, such as reading materials, projects that relate to interests and preferences are provided. Students see learning as an exciting, meaningful, and pleasurable experience. Because of the student's emotional and decisions, because of the student's emotions and decisions, are the central focus. This approach is often referred to as either student-directed or non-directive. To illustrate this approach, consider the case of a student who is unhappy about a poor grade on a test. The instinctive reaction of most teachers would be to explain how to study and prepare for the next test. The humanistically oriented teacher instead asks the student to describe his interest in the subject matter, how capable a learner the student feels himself to be, how well the student understands the subject, under what conditions the student studies, whether the student feels the teacher's instruction to be clear and well organized, and so on. To help students understand their feelings and the role they play in learning, the teacher may disclose some of her own feelings. For example, the teacher may tell this hypothetical student, "When I've had a bad day and feel as if I've let my students down, I sometimes question my ability as a teacher. Is that how you feel?" Once these self-perceptions have been raised and clarified, the teacher encourages the student to suggest a solution to the problem. This approach to instruction strongly implies that students who believe their teachers care about them as people and want to help them maximize their learning are likely to be highly motivated. Nell Noddings, an educational researcher who has written extensively about establishing a caring atmosphere in classrooms, and who we first mentioned in Chapter 2, describes this approach as one that seeks to produce happy students. She argues that happiness should be, but rarely is, an explicit and high priority goal of educators and educational policy makers. Noddings is hardly alone in her view. Two longtime humanistic researchers, Jerome and Donna Sclaro-Allender, note that the curriculum should emphasize students' interests because opportunities for following up on where one's curiosity leads are a sure bet for initial successful learning. Johnson and Thomas argue that an ideal time to establish a caring environment is the primary grades because such an environment promotes a sense of community, safety, learning-oriented values, and positive interpersonal experiences that will lead to higher levels of motivation and learning in those in later grades. And Falk, author of the Teaching the Way Children Learn, comments that children need to be in caring communities to develop the sense of self-worth necessary to take the risks that are involved in real learning. Nodding's observations that happy classrooms are the exception rather than the rule, sad to say, is supported by research findings. Observations in hundreds of primary and elementary grade classrooms reveal that only 17% of students experienced a positive emotional climate as they went from one grade to the next. There are concrete steps, however, that you can take to create a supportive climate in your own classroom. To start, you might try to observe and emulate the practices of teachers whose classrooms match the characteristics in the above list. Does research support the humanistic approach? The fundamental assumption of humanistic theory is that children's academic and personal growth is enhanced when teachers create a classroom environment that satisfies students' social and emotional needs. As logical and compelling as that statement sounds, we need to examine the research. Analysis of over 100 student studies have found that teachers who demonstrated empathy and warmth, encouraged higher level thinking, and used a non-directive approach were more likely than other teachers to have students who scored significantly higher. They were also highly likely to exhibit higher levels of class participation, score higher on measures of self-efficacy and satisfaction, and be less likely to drop out of school. Another way in which teachers demonstrate a caring orientation is when they establish a classroom environment that is designed to satisfy the belonging need of students. Belonging, which is also referred to as relatedness and sense of community, means that the desire to get support from and be accepted by teachers and classmates and to have opportunity to participate. According to some motivational theorists, belonging is one of three basic psychological needs. Autonomy and competence are the other two, essential to human growth and development. Researchers have found a number of positive relationships between satisfaction of the need to belong and the following the school-related outcomes: increased intrinsic motivation to learn, competence, autonomy, or a sense of it, a sense of identity, a willingness to conform to rules and norms, positive attitudes towards school, work, and teachers, higher expectations of success, lower levels of anxiety, depression, and frustration, supportiveness of others, higher levels of achievement. Feelings of rejection or exclusion are associated with other bad things. A study of 8th grade classroom environments illustrates the essence of humanistic orientation as well as its positive effects. The atmosphere created by each teacher was described along 4 lines: teacher support, prompting interaction among classmates, promoting mutual respect and social harmony among classmates, and promoting performance goals. Each of these classroom environment components was related to several outcome measures, including the 4 listed in Figure 13.3. So, an extension of Ryan and Patrick's study on the classroom environments found that teacher support, promoting interaction, promoting mutual respect, and student academic support contribute to the adoption of mastery goals and to the strengthening of academic and social self-efficacy. These variables contributed in turn to task-related interactions, explaining one's reasoning, which affected self-regulation, behaviors, and achievement. The results of research on classroom atmosphere have strong implications for teachers in urban areas whose classrooms have a high percentage of minority students. Students of color who were bused to school or were attending an urban school reported weaker findings of belonging. Students of color in urban schools who said they liked going to school described their relationship with their teachers as supportive and caring. The social approach to teaching students how to learn from each other. Classroom tasks can be structured so that students are forced to compete with one another, to work individually, or to cooperate with one another to obtain the rewards that teachers make available for successfully completing these tasks. Traditionally, competitive arrangements have been assumed to be superior to the other two in increasing motivation and learning. Some research found the cooperative arrangements to be far superior. In this section, we will describe competitive individual and cooperative learning arrangements, identify the elements that make up the major approaches to cooperative learning, and examine the effect of cooperative learning on motivation, achievement, and interpersonal relationships. We'd also like to point out that cooperative learning methods are fully consistent with social constructivism because they encourage inquiry, perspective sharing, and conflict resolution. Competitive structures. Competitive goal structures are those in which one's grade is determined by how well everyone else in the classroom performs. A reward structure that is typically referred to as normed referenced. The traditional practice of grading on the curve predetermines the percentage of A, B, C, D, and F grades, regardless of the actual distribution of test scores. Because only a small percentage of students in any group can achieve the highest rewards, and because this accomplishment must come at some other student's expense, competitive goal structures are characterized by negative interdependence. Students try to outdo one another, view classmates' failures as an advantage, and come to believe that the winners deserve their rewards because they're inherently better. Some researchers have argued that competitive reward structures lead students to focus on ability as the primary basis for motivation. This orientation is reflected in the question, am I smart enough to accomplish this task? When ability is the basis for motivation, competing successfully in the classroom may be seen as necessary to self-esteem because nobody loves a loser, difficult to accomplish because only a few can succeed, and uncertain. These perceptions may cause some students to avoid challenging subjects or tasks, give up in the face of difficulty, reward themselves only if they win a competition, and believe that their own successes are due to ability, whereas the success of others are due to luck. Individualistic structures. Individualistic goal structures are characterized by students working alone and earning rewards solely on the quality of their own efforts. The success or failure of other students is irrelevant. All that matters is whether the student meets the standards for a particular task. For example, 30 students working by themselves at computer terminals are functioning in an individual reward structure. According to Carol Ames and Russell Ames, individual structures lead students to focus on task effort as the primary basis for motivation. This orientation is reflected in the statement, "I can do this if I try." Whether a student perceives a task as difficult depends on how successful she has been with that type of task in the past. Cooperative structures. Cooperative goal structures are characterized by students working together to accomplish shared goals. What is beneficial for the other students in the group is beneficial for the individual and vice versa. Because students in cooperative groups can obtain a desired reward only if the other students in the group also obtain the same reward, cooperative goal structures are characterized by positive interdependence. Also, all groups may receive the same rewards, provided they meet the teacher's criteria for mastery. For example, a teacher might present a lesson on map reading, then give each group its own map and a question-answering exercise. Students then work with each other to ensure that all know how to interpret maps. Each student then takes a quiz on map reading. All teams whose average quiz scores meet a preset standard receive special recognition. In the suggestions for teaching, motivating students to learn section in Chapter 11, we describe two particular cooperative learning techniques: student team achievement divisions and jigsaw. Cooperative structures lead students to focus on effort and cooperation as the primary basis of motivation. This orientation is reflected in the statement, "We can do this if we try hard and work together." In a cooperative atmosphere, students are motivated out of a sense of obligation. One ought to try, contribute, and help satisfy group norms. Glasser points out that student motivation and performance tend to be highest for such activities as band, drama club, athletics, the school newspaper, and the yearbook, all of which require a team effort. Elements of cooperative learning. Over the past 30 years, different approaches to cooperative learning have been proposed by different individuals. The three most popular are those of Johnson, and Slavin, Sharon, and so forth. To give you a general sense of what cooperative learning is like and to avoid limiting you to any one individual's approach, the following discussion is a synthesis of the main features of each approach. Group heterogeneity. The size of cooperative learning groups is relatively small and as heterogeneous as circumstances allow. The recommended size is usually 4 to 5 students. At the very least, groups should contain both males and females and students of different ability levels. If possible, different ethnic backgrounds and social classes should be represented as well. Group goals, positive interdependence. A specific goal, such as a grade or a certificate of recognition, is identified for the group to attain. Students are told that they will have to support one another because the group goal can be achieved only if each member learns the material being taught, in the case of a task that culminates in an exam, or makes a specific contribution to the group's effort, in the case of a task that culminates in a presentation or a project. Promotive interaction. This element is made necessary by the existence of positive interdependence. Students are shown how to help one another overcome problems and complete whatever task has been assigned. This may involve episodes of peer tutoring, temporary assistance, exchanges of information and material, challenging of one another's reasoning, feedback, and encouragement to keep one another highly motivated. Promotive means simply that Students promote each other's success. Individual accountability. This feature stipulates that each member of a group has to make a significant contribution to achieving the group's goal. This may be satisfied by requiring the group to achieve a minimal score on a test, by having the group's test score be the sum or average of each student's quiz scores, or by having each member be responsible for a particular part of a project, such as doing the research and writing for a particular part of a history report. Interpersonal skills. Positive interdependence and promotive interaction are not likely to occur if students do not know how to make the most of their face-to-face interactions. And you can safely assume that the interpersonal skills most students possess are probably not highly developed. As a result, they have to be taught such basic skills as leadership, decision-making, trust-building, clear communication, and conflict management. The conflict that arises over differences of opinion, for example, can be constructive if it is used as a stimulus to search for more information or to rethink one's conclusions. But it can destroy group cohesion and productivity if it results in students stubbornly clinging to a position or referring to one another as stubborn, dumb, or nerdy. Equal opportunities for success. Because cooperative groups are heterogeneous with respect to ability and their success depends on positive interdependence, promotive interaction, and individual accountability, it is important that steps be taken to ensure that all students have an opportunity to contribute to their team. You can do this by awarding points for degree of improvement over previous test scores, by having students compete against comparable members of their teams in a game or tournament-like atmosphere, or by giving students learning assignments, such as math problems, that are geared to their current level of skill. Team competition. This may seem to be an odd entry in a list of cooperative learning components, especially in the light of the comments we already made about the ineffectiveness of competition as a spur to motivation and learning. But we're not being contradictory. The main problem with competition is that it is used rarely appropriately. When competition occurs between well-matched teams, it is done in the absence of a norm-referenced grading system, and is framed as a mechanism that encourages students to put forth their best effort. It can be an effective way to motivate students to cooperate with each other. Does cooperative learning work? The short answer to this question is yes. In the vast majority of studies, they've been shown to be effective more than non-cooperative reward structures in raising the levels of variables that contribute to motivation, in raising achievement, and in producing positive social outcomes. Effect on motivation. An analysis of 15 studies that measured the effect of cooperative learning on the motivational levels of elementary grade students found moderate to strong effects in 11 of the studies. Those that had the strongest positive effects used interdependent rewards. Each group member receives a reward only if the group achieves its goal, and had additional motivational components such as individualized curriculum materials. Motivational effects were larger for minority than for non-minority students, and for urban students than for suburban or rural students. Although most of the reported effects of cooperative learning have been positive, negative results have occasionally appeared. 11th grade students whose chemistry classes use a form of cooperative learning experienced declines in motivation, whereas students in the whole class instruction group reported slight increases. The researchers attributed this finding to students being dissatisfied with the pace and amount of learning because of an upcoming high-stakes test. Effect on achievement. The effect of cooperative learning in its various forms on achievement has been extensively studied. Analyses of studies conducted during the past 40 years have found moderate to large increases in test scores. This means that students exposed to cooperative learning scored anywhere from 10 to 25% higher than students taught conventionally. 2 recent analyses of research have added to the positive results reported earlier. The first analysis found that students in cooperative groups who worked on problem-solving activities that required them to use all 6 cognitive processes represented in Bloom's taxonomy, discussed in the first section of this chapter, scored significantly higher on a subsequent achievement test than did comparable peers who also worked in groups but received no training in group interaction. The second analysis found that the math scores of middle school and high school students were considerably higher when teachers used cooperative learning programs than when they used either computer-based instruction or just a textbook, and it didn't matter which textbook they used. Effect on social interaction. An important part of cooperative learning programs is teaching students how to productively interact with one another, including how to ask relevant leading questions and how to give group members coherent or cogent arguments and justifications for the explanations and help they offer. A team of researchers examined whether pairs of students trained to interact in this way would use these skills more frequently to solve math problems than would student pairs not taught these skills. The study produced a somewhat unusual result. Although students who received training made significantly more high-level or elaborative responses when asking for and giving help on the math task than did the untrained students, they did so less frequently than they had before the training. Among several explanations offered by the researchers, two appear to be particularly likely. First, the math problems that the students were given to solve were of the well-structured variety that we described in Chapter 10. This means that most students might have worked out a solution pretty much on their own, thereby reducing the need for elaborative discussions. A second possibility is that because the post-test problems were quite similar to the pre-test problems, they required less effort to solve them. As one student put it, the second time the problems were about the same as the first time, you still know how to solve them, and if you both know the answer, there is no need for an explanation. This finding highlights a point we have made in several previous chapters. All instructional practices and programs have their limits, and it pays to know what those limits are. The researchers also found that students who had prior experience in cooperative learning, whether or not they received specific supplementary training in how to productively ask questions and provide assistance, scored higher on the math task than students who had no prior exposure to cooperative learning. Research has also shown that because average ability students are least likely to participate actively in group discussions, they are most in need of instruction in group interaction skills. High ability students tend to take the lead. Compared to average ability students in untrained groups, average ability students who have been taught how to seek and give help engage in more helping interactions and score higher on achievement tests. In sum, students who learn cooperatively tend to be more highly motivated to learn because of the pro-academic attitudes of group mates, appropriate attributions for success and failure, and greater on-task behavior. They also score higher on tests of achievement and problem solving and tend to get along better with classmates of different racial, ethnic, and social class backgrounds. This last outcome should be of particular interest if you expect to teach in an area marked by cultural diversity. Why does cooperative learning work? When researchers attempt to explain the widespread positive effects that are typically found among studies of cooperative learning, they usually cite one or more of the following explanations. Motivational effect. The various features of cooperative learning, particularly positive interdependence, are highly motivating because they encourage such achievement-oriented behaviors as trying hard, attending class regularly, praising the effects of others, and receiving help from one's group mates. Learning is seen as an obligation and a valued activity because the group success is based on it, and one's group mates will reward it. Cognitive developmental effect. According to Lev Vygotsky, collaboration promotes cognitive growth because students model for each other more advanced ways of thinking than any would demonstrate individually. According to Jean Piaget, collaboration among peers hastens the decline of egocentrism and allows the development of more advanced ways of understanding and dealing with the world. Research appears to support both of these explanations depending on how the group members interact, but that is not quite the end of the story. Recent research suggests that contradictions or inconsistencies not resolved by the group stimulate later attempts by some participants to resolve the contradictions on their own. Cognitive elaborative effect. As we saw in the previous discussion of information processing theory, new information that is elaborated, restructured, and related to existing knowledge is more easily retrieved from memory than is information that is not elaborated. A particularly effective means of elaboration is explaining something to someone else. Teachers' use of collaborative or cooperative learning. As we have seen, cooperative learning provides or produces a variety of academic benefits for most students. Consequently, you might assume that this approach is widely used in classrooms, but until a group of researchers interviewed 21 teachers from 6 elementary schools to assess the extent to which they use cooperative learning methods and in what form, those remained open questions. What these researchers found was quite interesting. All of the teachers claimed they were familiar with cooperative learning through pre-service learning, student teaching, graduate classes, workshops, or other teachers. 17 of the teachers said they used it every day in a typical week. Most reported being attracted to cooperative learning because it enabled them to address both academic and social learning goals within a single approach. But even though teachers say they use cooperative learning, they aren't necessarily using it as it was intended. Antil et al. Argued that for an instructional approach to merit the label cooperative learning, it must include at least the conditions of positive interdependence and individual accountability. A more stringent definition would call for the inclusion of promotive interaction, group heterogeneity, and the development of interpersonal skills. Only 5 of the 21 teachers met the 2-feature criterion, and only 1 reported using all 5 features. For example, instead of creating heterogeneous groups by putting students of different ability levels together, some teachers used random assignment, allowed students to select their teammates, or allowed students who sat near one another to form groups. Similar results were obtained from a study of 216 highly rated elementary and middle school teachers. Their actual use of such critical components as individual accountability, positive interdependence, and development of interpersonal skills was significantly less than what they would have preferred. Why do teachers follow the spirit but not the letter of the cooperative learning model? They offer several possibilities. Perhaps teachers find the models too complicated and difficult. Teachers don't really believe the researchers' claims. Teachers interpret the research as providing suggestions or guidelines. Researchers rarely explicitly state that the demonstrated benefits of cooperative learning will occur only when the conditions are met. Blah, blah.